We begin the day with a U.S. president-elect preparing so that he can hit the ground running, and the sitting U.S. president standing in the way. In the week since the election, Joe Biden has wasted no time with celebrating. Yesterday, he appointed a COVID-19 commission to help develop a national strategy for dealing with the pandemic. World leaders continue to congratulate Biden. Today, the president-elect spoke with the German chancellor and the British prime minister. Now, in stark contrast, President-elect Biden has spoken with very few Republican members of Congress. They continue to be silent as President Trump continues to claim that Democrats stole the election and offer no evidence to back those claims. The false accusations have been so outrageous that U.S. media have interrupted White House press briefings in order to flag those untruths to the viewers. Now, this is just part of what the White House and the Republican Party said yesterday.
This election is not over. Far from it. We have only begun the process of obtaining an accurate, honest vote count. We want an honest, accurate, lawful count. We want maximum sunlight. We want maximum transparency. We want every legal vote to be counted, and we want every illegal vote to be discarded.
If the shoe were on the other foot, if it were this close the other way, if President Trump was in the lead in all these states and the media would be screaming, this isn't over, the race isn't over, we need more time to count and make sure it's right. But because it's Biden and a very slight lead, the media demands the race is over and there's nothing to see here.
Well, few Republicans are talking publicly about the election. My next guest, he may be an exception. Joe Watkins served as an aide to President George H.W. Bush. He is also a pastor in Philadelphia, and that is where he is joining me from tonight. Mr. Watkins, it's good to have you on the day. You worked for the first Bush president. His son, who was president from 2000 to 2008, has congratulated Joe Biden on winning. How do you explain this relative silence among Republicans in Congress concerning the election?
Well, I think the silence is pretty much short term. I think that if you consider what people have to gain or lose in the short term, you might better understand their silence. I think that most members of the Senate, Republican members of the Senate, certainly along with most members of the Republican House, believe that Joe Biden has won the election fair and square, as we say, and that he is the president-elect. For the most part, they're allowing the president to exercise his right as a candidate to question the votes and certainly to seek any legal redress that he might want to seek. Now, just because he's seeking legal redress doesn't mean that he's going to find that there were any irregularities. It doesn't mean that the courts are going to find in his favor. As a matter of fact, most people expect the courts not to find anything in his favor. That being said, they're giving the president that latitude, that freedom certainly for the next few days, to exercise his right as president and as a candidate for the presidency to make legal challenges. But I think that for most of the members of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House, they believe that Joe Biden has won the election and is the president-elect of the United States.
Well, we know that the president, at least publicly, says he does not believe that. We also know that he is starting a super PAC, which will allow him to raise money for political purposes. Now, this tells us that Mr. Trump is not planning to depart from politics anytime soon. Do you think, Donald Trump, do you think he will run for president in 2024?
Well, there's always the possibility that he could. Clearly, there's nothing that would bar him constitutionally from seeking a second term if he chooses to be a candidate in the primary in 2024. There are lots of other Republicans as well who would like to have the chance to serve. But this president did get over 70 million votes, which is a substantial number of votes. The question would be going forward is, can he retain that base of support and win those people to his side, even as we head into 2021 and 2022, and certainly well in advance of 2024.
Mr. Watkins, you mentioned this. More than 70 million people voted for Donald Trump, and that's despite everything that he has said and done, things that violate decency, civility, and some people would say even democracy. How do you explain that to our global viewers when they ask, what has happened to America?
Well, what I say is that this is the part of the democratic process that it allows for everybody to be heard, even people who may not be civil. It gives them a chance to be heard, to have their say in the public square, and then for Americans to vote either for or against, yay or nay, based on what they think. And so while for many people in the United States and even throughout the world, the lack of civility was a problem, at the end of the day, even people who aren't civil in the United States have a chance to be heard. And if they're able to be elected, then they are, and they have a chance to vote, to fashion laws in this country if they're elected to the House or the Senate, or if they're elected president. But again, it's the people's choice. In the United States, no matter what happens, it's the will of the American people. And certainly in this cycle, the will of the American people was to elect Joe Biden, the next president of the United States. And so I suspect that in the coming days, maybe by the weekend, we may have more Republicans out front publicly, that is, elected Republican senators and congressmen acknowledging President-elect Biden's win and congratulating him for that win, and then hopefully the movement forward for a transition.
Do you think that there will be a group of Republican members of Congress who will go to the president and say, Mr. President, the time has come, you have to admit that you lost this election?
Likely not. Likely not. And I say likely not because you have to consider what's at stake for Republicans, certainly in the Senate. In the Senate, remember, right now we have something akin to a tie. I think about 48-48. There are still 3 races that are yet to be decided. And so as long as you don't know what the outcome of those races are going to be, you'll have jockeying certainly on the Republican side as well as on the Democratic side, because if Mitch McConnell wants to remain the majority leader, he's got to have a majority of Republicans in the Senate. So you've got two Republican senators in Georgia who are going to be involved in runoff races in the coming weeks. And I think a senator in North Carolina has not yet been certified as the winner. So
that's right.
He's got to consider all these things.
So what you're saying, this is basically about power politics. And after 4 years of Trumpism in the GOP, do you think that maybe the soul of the party needs to be checked, or that does the GOP deserve a second chance or a rebirth?
Well, we've got some wonderful people in the Republican Party, and the hope for the party going forward is the same as the hope for the country, that the people in the party will listen to the better angels of our nature as leading voices in the party, and that the people that emerge to the top of the heap are folks who are civil and who want to work with Democrats and Republicans to move the country forward, and who understand all the challenges that we face in the United States and around the world, whether it's our own economy or the global economy or climate. These are all things that are important to all of us. And so the hope is that the Republican Party can recoup. After Joe Biden takes the oath of office, Republicans will have to work hard to put together a winning coalition. So they'll have to draw upon the existing base of the party, but also build with minorities, with African Americans, with Latino voters, with women, with voters that they haven't done particularly well with in the past, to build what they hope will be a majority for the midterm elections in 2022.
I want to speak to you, the Joe Watkins, who's the pastor and not the Republican strategist here for a moment. President Trump's spiritual advisor, Paula White, she has made a name for herself internationally. She's known for her prosperity Christianity. If you're rich, it's because you're living right. She has said that when she sees Democrats, she sees the devil, and she has the ear of the president. Does that worry you?
Well, I know one thing, having been around for a long time, that administrations come and go and advisors to presidents come and go. As far as the gospel of Christ is concerned, it's unchanging. It's the same, and it has nothing to do with how much money you have. It has everything to do with whether or not you surrender and follow Christ and you're on a path that leads to eternal life, and that's based on whether or not you're willing to help to feed those who are hungry and give drink to those who are thirsty, and to not consider what their status is, whether they're poor or rich, but to love them anyway, because we believe that God loves all of us. So I'm not worried. Paula White is there for the time being. But I worked for a U.S. president in the White House. My daughter worked in the White House for another U.S. president. So the presidents come and they go, and so do their advisors. So I'm not worried about the future. I'm confident about the future.
Well, we certainly do appreciate and like your optimism, Mr. Watkins. Joe Watkins joining us tonight from Pennsylvania. It's good having you on the show. We appreciate your insights tonight. Thank you.
Glad to be with you. Thanks.
When a U.S. president wins a second term, it is not unusual for the president to rearrange or reshuffle his cabinet. When a U.S. president loses the election, he usually leaves things as is, which makes transferring power to a new administration easier. Rules and traditions like this, well, they have been broken and busted often by President Trump. Yesterday, he fired Mark Esper, the Secretary of Defense, and he did it with a tweet. Now, this is what Trump tweeted. He writes, "I am pleased to announce that Christopher C. Miller, the highly respected director of the National Counterterrorism Center, unanimously confirmed by the Senate, will be acting Secretary of Defense effective immediately." He goes on to write, "Chris will do a great job. Mark Esper has been terminated. I would like to thank him for his service." And with that, the Secretary of Defense was fired. Well, I'm joined tonight by Bradley Bowman. He's the senior director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He has been a national security advisor in the U.S. Senate. He served in the U.S. Army. Brad, it's good to have you back here on the day. What does firing Mark Esper immediately after an election and in the middle of a disputed election outcome, what does that mean for U.S. security and the morale of U.S. servicemen and women?
No, thanks for the opportunity to join you again. It's a pleasure and an honor. I think the morale of our servicemen and women will be okay. I think our allies and adversaries need to know that the U.S. maintains a preeminent military capability, and we have the means to defend our interests and those of our allies. But I must say that this firing of Mark Esper is unfortunate, both in terms of the manner of how it was done and also its timing.
Esper was expected to be fired. Earlier this year, he did not support Trump's notion of deploying the military, the U.S. military, to quell protests and riots within the U.S. I mean, Esper's stance, it is the stance that is taken by, I would say, all leaders at the Pentagon. Can we say that the Pentagon and the president right now are about as estranged as they have been?
I wouldn't. I would say there are real issues there, and you've highlighted one of them. I wouldn't say the Pentagon, right, because that's kind of amorphous, and most of the people serving in the Pentagon are either service members or Department of Defense civilians, and all of them have sworn an oath not to a president but to the Constitution. But there's no doubt there were real issues between Mark Esper, whom I know and respect, and the president. And the irony here is one of my colleagues at my think tank has said is that, the President Trump, kind of mocked Mark Esper, calling him Yesper, implying he's a yes man. But the reality is it looks like he was fired because he was anything but a yes man. And there were real area differences. There's questions about the naming of U.S. bases after Confederate generals, where Mark Esper appeared to be taking action inconsistent with the president's view. And then these subsequent statements by Secretary Esper after the unfortunate incident in Lafayette Park behind the White House.
What does all of this mean for those who are just under the Secretary of Defense? They are the ones who would have to carry out an order from the president in a military conflict, for example. They would be held responsible. Can you imagine them carrying out an order from President Trump if that order were to be illegal or unconstitutional or maybe violate a treaty?
Well, it's a great question. One of the reasons why I said a moment ago I felt like the timing was unfortunate was because, we're in a period of transition here, to say the least, in the United States, and we really do need leadership in the Pentagon right now, in my view, is willing to, as appropriate, push back on bad ideas that may emanate from the White House. From my view, we've had one or two of those in the last 3.5, 4 years. And it's not a good time to have an acting secretary leading the Department of Defense. So that is concerning. I would also note James Anderson, the acting undersecretary of Defense for Policy, also resigned today. So you really see just dramatic changes at the top of the Pentagon. So I am concerned, but I do take some comfort in the following. When I was serving in the Army myself, I was an assistant professor at West Point. I taught a class in American politics. In the first class, I would always remind the cadets, future Army officers, that their oath was to the Constitution and not to any individual, not to any president. And I think our service members will remember that, as they always have done, and they'll be faithful to that Constitution. Our country's going to be okay, but it's going to be a rough couple months, unfortunately, I think, but we'll get through it.
You know, you speak to the servicemen, the people who make up the military. You know the defense community in Washington. I mean, the president firing his Secretary of Defense with a tweet, or even in that tweet, you know, Trump succeeded in belittling Mr. Esper just by the way he wrote it. I mean, is this a commander-in-chief that people in the military, can they respect Donald Trump?
Well, you know, it's a good question. I wouldn't want to pretend to speak, and you're not asking me to do that, to speak for all of them. But, you know, there were the reports by The Atlantic and others about what the president reportedly said. Obviously, that doesn't sit well with a lot of people. You want your commander-in-chief to have the best interests at heart of service members and their families. You know, but, you know, I like I said, I know Mark Esper from before he served in the Pentagon. Let's remember, I mean, he served 20 years in the U.S. Army.
Yeah.
He served impressively, in my view, as Secretary of the Army. And he's also served honorably as Secretary of Defense. You know, we can debate, you know, this policy is good, that policy is bad. No man or woman is perfect. But, you know, this is not how any human being should be treated, particularly someone who served our country so honorably. It's unfortunate that we've arrived at this place in American domestic politics where we treat political adversaries or people we disagree with as enemies. We have too many real enemies in the world to be treating our fellow citizens that way. I think it's unfortunate and potentially dangerous.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people on both sides of the Atlantic who would agree with you 100% on that. Brad Bowman, Senior Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington. Brad, as always, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and we appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.